Everyone. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, have you ever had trouble letting go of someone, like at the end of some kind of relationship? Maybe it was a romantic relationship, maybe a friendship, maybe a family relationship. Um, Maybe it was a relationship that you thought was there in some form, and then you realized, wait, oh, it actually wasn't. You had that experience. And this can even happen when someone has died and we've lost that loved one. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today is not grieving. What I'm going to be talking about today is something separate from that very natural grieving process when we go through a loss, whether someone's died or we go through the loss of something else in our lives that was really meaningful to us. So, and I would suggest that there are lots of good resources, lots of good counselors, counseling groups out there if you're going through a grieving process, if you've lost someone. And so I would really encourage you to take a look for that and see if you can find a resource to help you through your grieving process. And I'm so very sorry for your loss. But today what I want to talk about is something that can go alongside grieving or can happen without grieving, but at the end of a relationship separate from grieving. And so maybe you have felt like you need this person or this form of relationship in order to survive, in order just to be okay. Maybe you are feeling like you should have been able to sustain the relationship, preserve it, keep that person with you. And maybe you feel like you should have done something better. Maybe you feel like you should have been able to fix something. And you kind of have a sick feeling of regret about that. And I'm wondering if you maybe even can separate this need for that relationship from the actual person you were in a relationship with. Maybe you look at a relationship, a friendship, a family relationship, or a romantic relationship, and you look at the person who you were in that relationship with and think, you know, we weren't really great for each other. There were some things going on there that weren't great for me. And yet you're still feeling like you need that relationship and you need that person back in that spot in your life. Does that sound familiar? Maybe you're even feeling that there's a pattern there as you look back over your life of a certain kind of feeling that you experience every time you go through the end of a relationship. And I can really relate to this from my experience. There's a certain feeling that always came up for me from breakups, from when a violin teacher in my professional violin training in my first career, violin teacher moved across the country, and I lost my violin teacher. And I felt it last year when my 16-year-old dog died. And so there was a pattern there for me that I can trace back to my father dying when I was 3.5 years old. So that feeling has been there for a long time. Again, separate from grieving, something separate from that. So have you noticed this? Are you feeling particularly gripped by this feeling at the end of a relationship? Have you worked on it? Have you done therapy, self-help work? Are you feeling better? Are you feeling more centered in yourself? Are you feeling less regretful? If so, that's fantastic. That's really great. But if not, if it feels like this is just lingering too long or even feeling more intense over time, like you should have been able to move on in some way, it's really affecting your daily life maybe and how you function and how you feel overall. And it feels like your work to overcome this hasn't addressed that. You are not alone. It is not your fault. It is because the work that you've tried to do to address this problem has not been able to get the learned distress in you out of the way. it has not enabled you to get rid of the learned distress that's actually causing those feelings to happen, because the feelings aren't really about that other person. They're really about the feeling that there's something wrong with you. So let me define learned distress for you. Learned distress is the quanta change term for the feeling that there's something wrong with you being just the way that you are. You absorbed this very early in life, before you had a choice, from the way your parents and other early caregivers, maybe older siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, who are around you closely all the time, from the way they felt about being themselves. And along with absorbing learned distress, your brain develops a survival mechanism that allows you to, well, survive, to cope with, to control, to manage this awful feeling that there's something wrong with you. That survival mechanism also is formed sort of like a puzzle piece around the people around you, your important early caregivers. And so it's like you kind of fit like a puzzle piece with them. And then over time, your sense of self, which stores your learned distress and survival mechanism, is automatically generating all the relationships in your life out of what's stored in your sense of self, how you feel about being yourself. And it's generating those relationships, at least partially, based on this feeling that there's something wrong with you and you have to be this certain way in order to survive with that learned distress. Okay, so in some way, so there are six basic patterns of learned distress plus survival mechanism. And in some way, each of those patterns says to us, in order to survive with this feeling that there's something wrong with you, in order to try and fix that or overcome it, you need another person to be in some certain way, in some certain relationship to you, in some certain place in your life. That's what's going to help you cope with or manage or control this awful feeling that there's something wrong with you. Okay, so why is it that this relationship thing is so gripping? If you've been nodding your head yes, why is this so gripping as a part of the survival mechanism? Well, it's because the most fundamental need we have as human beings is to feel that we matter. And then conversely, the biggest piece of learned distress we have is the feeling that we don't matter just for being ourselves. And so because of that, and because this I matter thing is something that we gauge almost entirely based on how other people treat us, how other people are in relation to us, then this learned distress that I don't matter kind of gets attached to other people and certain kinds of relationships. And it feels like in order to survive, I need this, right? So that's different from enjoying another person. That's different from sharing who you are with them and enjoying who they are. It's really this need of, I'm not going to survive unless I have this particular relationship with them. So when a relationship ends that we feel like we've needed in this way, it really can trigger the most intense learned distress, this feeling that there's something wrong with me and I didn't do enough to preserve my survival mechanism, this other person in my life in this relationship, right? And so it may trigger anxiety, fear, depression, may really trigger feelings of regret, of this feeling that I should have been able to preserve this relationship in the way that it was. Okay, so, and if you're seeing a pattern in the way relationships end for you and how you feel about that, how you're feeling after a relationship has ended, that's because your sense of self, again, is generating all of the situations and relationships and conditions and the way things happen in your life out of your stored feeling about being yourself, which in terms of what we're talking about today is this feeling that I don't matter. And so then you keep seeing that same feeling of pattern as relationships end. So why is it that all of this work that you may have done, maybe you've done you're thinking, I've done decades of therapy or other kinds of work on myself, and every time a relationship ends, it's just even worse than the time before. Why is it all of that work hasn't fixed this for you? Hasn't made it better? Why isn't knowing, maybe you say, I know I don't need that other person, and yet I feel like I do. Why is it that all of that work hasn't gotten rid of this awful feeling that you need them in order to be okay? Well, that's because of something I call the rational brain roadblock. So this is the phenomenon by which, when your rational brain is operating, there is a wall of protection around your sense of self that stores how you feel about being yourself and is this generating force in your life. And that wall of protection says, you are not touching this survival mechanism. This is how I've stayed alive. Hands off. You're not touching it, right? And so the good news that I have for you is that Quanta Change was developed to get through this rational brain roadblock that really has prevented you from changing this deep feeling way, has meant that you can't just think your way out of this awful feeling. So Quanta Change does that by working with your brain during sleep. And there are two reasons for that work during sleep. The first is that sleep is when your rational brain is entirely shut down. So with that, the wall of protection around your sense of self is deactivated, and we can get into how you actually feel about being yourself. And then sleep is also when your sense of self is getting recharged. And it's recharging with a feeling that you've lived through the day that you've just lived. And so when Quanta Change is able to access your sense of self, we're really tapping into that natural recharging process. And what Quanta Change does in that is says, wait a second, I don't want to recharge with learned distress anymore. I want to recharge with my natural well-being. This is a feeling at my core that I am just great being myself, that I matter just for being myself. I matter just because I exist as a human being, not because I've been a certain way, done a certain thing, maintained a certain relationship, because that person is telling me certain things. I matter just for being myself. So as you start to recharge every night with well-being instead of learned distress, your brain peels off layers of learned distress permanently, and your natural well-being expands to take the place that learned distress was sitting. So as you can imagine, you feel way better the more of that happens. And in the case of what we're talking about today, one of the things that happens more specifically is that as you feel more and more of this core well-being, that you matter just for being yourself, just because you exist, you feel less and less need for this certain person, this certain kind of relationship. Again, that's very different from enjoying someone, sharing your life with someone, sharing moments with someone, sharing, a friendship with someone, sharing a great family relationship with someone. It's that I need this in order to survive. That voice gets less and less. And so I matter. This feeling that I matter just for being myself is an inside job. Again, we think that we're going to matter because somebody tells us something, somebody behaves in a certain way towards us, and that's what's going to make us matter. It doesn't. Here's the thing. When I say I matter as an inside job, what I mean is that people are responding to us and treating us based on how we feel about being ourselves at our core. So when we feel like we don't matter, they tend to treat us like we don't matter. And the more we feel like we do matter just for being ourselves, the more people, even some of the same people in our lives, tend to start treating us differently, like we do matter. They start listening more. They start treating us with more respect. Or we find different people in our lives, new people in our lives, who are able to do that and do that. So, and let me say, even when relationships end, when there's a lot more well-being, you have that core in yourself. You say, wait a second, I'm still here. I still matter. That ended, and I may be sad about that. I might grieve that, but that's different from feeling that panic about, oh no, now what am I going to do? I can't survive now. Okay, so let me give you a couple of specific examples from my work over the last 22 years in this vein. So one is a client who came from a highly abusive household. Not only were her parents very abusive, both of them, but her older siblings were extremely abusive towards her. And then over the years, as she became an adult, that really trickled out into her nieces and nephews, tended to treat her the same way as their parents had. It's an extended family, and with my client sort of in the center of it, being treated badly by almost everyone. So horrible, right? And she realized that, like, I don't want a relationship with this sister, this niece, this nephew, that brother. Like, I don't want to be in a relationship with these people anymore. And yet she was totally gripped by this feeling of, I should have a family. I should have family. I should have this family. And I somehow haven't been able to do that, even though these people are awful to me and I actually don't want to be, corresponding with them. I don't want to be interacting with them. So I'm wondering if you can relate to that. If you feel like there are people in your life who've been awful to you, maybe it's family members, maybe it's people who you considered as friends at one time, maybe it's an abusive relationship you were in, or at least not a great relationship that you were in, and you feel like, yeah, that person is not somebody I really want to be interacting with anymore. I can see how awful it is with them, but I should still have that relationship in my life. Does that ring a bell? It's confusing, right? It's really confounding. It's like, well, wait a second, which is it, right? And it's both, right? If you're feeling this way, it's both. So let me tell you about my client. So she'd unlearned layers and layers and layers of this learned distress. And I'll just never forget, she came to me one day, and instead of saying, oh, my family, it's so awful and I should be able to do something about it, or, this is why my life is awful because, see, I can't have these family relationships. One day she came to me and she said, oh, you know what? I don't have to do this with them. I don't have to worry about them. I don't have to try and maintain these relationships with my nieces and nephews and their kids. I don't have to do that. I can focus on what I enjoy in my life. I can live my life and live it out in a way that I love and focus on what matters to me. I don't need them to survive, and I don't need those family relationships to survive. It's okay to not have a family. And if you've come from an abusive family, that's really a great day when you say, oh, wait a second, I don't need them and I don't have to maintain relationships with them. And if you don't come from an abusive family, maybe you're thinking, whoa, I cannot relate to that. But those of us who have, it's an incredibly freeing moment when we say, wow, I don't have to do that anymore. So that's one example. And let me say, this is a spontaneous thing. This is not plotting and planning this out and deciding, okay, I don't need them and I'm going to keep reminding myself of that. It's really, you wake up one day and you actually feel different and you feel better and you feel that something that has been on your shoulders for years just is lifted off, and you don't have to do that anymore. It's a really incredible feeling that comes out of this quanta change process. So let me give you one more example, and that example is me. I will go back to my pattern of the ends of relationships. And so let me tell you about my dog dying last year. Now, she was 16. She was my best buddy. She was the greatest dog on the planet and the cutest, of course. And I love her dearly, and I miss her every single day. And that is grieving. I miss her, and I still cry about losing her, and I'm still going through the grieving process on that. But I really got the chance when she died to see that there was something else that got triggered, and it was very familiar, and it was just sort of nagging in the back of my head. Do you know that thing where it's just like, it's sitting back there. I almost can't touch it, but it's constant. It's nagging at you. Yeah, that was happening for me. And so I realized what it was is that it felt like I didn't do things perfectly enough for her. I didn't do enough for her. Now, her several vets and PTs and other practitioners who were working on her all the time so that I could give her the best health possible in the last couple of years as she was declining. All of the people I was consulting with, veterinary professionals, they would laugh. They would laugh if I said to them, I didn't do enough, because they were saying, Sarah, you're doing more than 99% of pet parents. I wish every single one of my patients had a parent like you. So it wasn't factually that I wasn't doing enough. It was that there was this pattern of I should have been able. Should have been able to do what, Sarah? She was a medium-sized dog. She was 16 years old. You were supposed to make her live forever? Well, that's ridiculous, right? Rationally, that's ridiculous. But learned distress isn't rational. Learned distress is sitting back there. It's 2 years old in your brain, always 2 years old, always not rational. And it was sitting back there saying, you should have done more, Sarah. You really should have done more. If you'd done more, she'd still be here. And as I really kind of dug back into that, I realized that went back to my father dying when I was 3.5. So I was told once that my favorite toy when he was still around was a nurse's bag. Now, that seems really sweet. You can think about that. Oh, you had a nurse's bag and you were nursing him, right? But think about that little toddler who was thinking, I'm the nurse. I'm the nurse. I'm fixing daddy. I'm the one who's keeping him alive. And then what happens when he dies? It's devastating, right? It's crushing to think what I must have felt like when he died, that it was my fault, that I didn't work hard enough to keep him around. So I was unlearning a bunch of that last year, more layers of that. I unlearned lots of layers of it. And I'd seen that pattern in the ends of romantic relationships, and like when my violin teacher left, and all of those times. But I was really unlearning more layers of that. And what I can tell you is now, I miss my dog. I miss her every day, like I said. But that awful nagging feeling of I should have done it, that kind of sick feeling of if I'd tried harder, she'd still be here, that's gone. I am at peace with her leaving. They never stay long enough with us, do they? All of you pet parents out there, but I'm at peace with her leaving. And I have, thousands of pictures on my phone of her and videos that I relive our wonderful life together all the time with. And, but I'm at peace with her leaving, and that it was her time. So does this resonate for you? Does any of this resonate for you? If so, if you're thinking, wow, there really has been something other than grieving going on at the ends of relationships for me, and I really want to address that. So the first thing to do, if you want to dive in and see if Quanta Change might be helpful to you, is to find out which one of these 6 patterns of learned distress and survival mechanism you have. So they are called the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, the caregiver, the defeatist, and the dictator, or sometimes we call that one benevolent dictator. And the reason to find out which one of these patterns you have is not to just examine your learned distress more. It's not to just dive deeper and find a better way to control it or manage it. It's to find out what Quanta Change is going to be helping you peel layers off of, so that you could really uncover your core well-being, allow it to expand, allow it to take up more and more space in your life, allow it to be more and more the generating force in your life, in your relationships and other parts of your life. So the way that you do that is you're going to go to my website and take a free, in-depth personality test that is scientifically validated to measure learned distress. And so I'm going to graph those answers for you and send you a personalized report with your pattern of learned distress and the ways that Quanta Change typically helps people feel better when they have that pattern of learned distress and survival mechanism. So the way that you get that report is to go to my website, Quanta Change, Quanta change.com, and click on the free report button. And that link is also going to be in the comments on this video and in my bio. So I hope this has felt helpful to you today. I hope that if you're really gripped by the end of a relationship, that this has helped you feel like there's some hope out there for really positive change that's possible, for really finding your own center and feeling really good and feeling that you really do matter just for being yourself, because that is totally possible. So thank you again for joining me, and I hope you'll join me again next week for another way in which quanta change really can help you feel good being you. Thank you.